Hello and welcome to our first lecture for statistics. This is Chapter 1 on the nature of statistics. And the very first question we start out with in our reading is we ask, what is statistics all about? So let's go over some basics, because anytime we deal with statistics, more than anything else, we have to understand the language. I think that one of the most important aspects of any math-related course, but especially the statistics course, is understanding what's being asked. If you can't understand what's being asked, how can you be expected to understand how to answer the question? So the very first thing we want to establish is, what do we mean by statistics? Now, statistics, the course itself, is about all of the things that we study in analyzing and summarizing and producing values that tell us something about a population or a sample. But when we talk about statistics, very often what we mean are descriptive statistics, which consists of methods for organizing and summarizing data. Really, we think of that data as our major information, and statistics, more than being a mathematics course, is a course about how we handle this information, and it's more of a science than it is a math. It's a science of numbers. In descriptive statistics, we include the construction of graphs and charts and tables, and the calculation of very descriptive measures such as averages and measures of variation, standard deviation, and percentiles. All of these things are very important measures to us and tell us something about the group of data that we're working with. For example, in 1948 baseball season, the Washington Senators played 153 games. They won 56 and lost 97. They finished 7th in the American League and were led by hitting by Bud Stewart, whose batting average was .279 that year. This is an illustration of what we call descriptive statistics. All of those numbers, winning 56 out of 153 games, lead batting average .279, all of these are illustrations of what we're describing about the numbers. If we were to look at the massive numbers that actually described every single game, we were looking at the statistics, and each data point told us what was going to happen. Our main goal in statistics, however, is a little bit different. In statistics, we have a population, which is a collection of all of the individuals under consideration in a statistical study. For example, we could consider the population of people in the United States, but a population could also consist of all of the bottles of Coca-Cola that are coming out of a Coca-Cola assembly plant, a Coca-Cola drink plant, right? We could think about that whole population as being anything that we're looking at as a study. A sample is a part of the population in which the information is obtained. And amazingly, what we are aiming to do in statistics is to tell us something about that population just based on the sample. So, for example, political polling provides an example of what we call inferential statistics. In interviewing everyone of voting age in the United States on their voting preference, it would be expensive and unrealistic. And of course, you know that anytime you get a polling call on a telephone, on your cell phone, for example, you're probably like me. You hear, "Hello, we'd like to find your opinion on," before I even find out what their opinion is, click, I turn off the phone. Right? Pity the poor poll taker. Statisticians who want to gauge the sentiment of the entire population can really, realistically, only base it on a group of a few thousand voters, and this sample is supposed to be representative of the entire population. Well, that's our goal really in this course. How do we go from getting a sample of a few thousand people and tell something about the polling preferences, for example, of the entire population of millions? Inferential statistics is the methods that we draw and measure the reliability of conclusions about the population based on information that we obtain from the sample about the population. When we analyze this information obtained from the sample of the voting population, make inferences, and draw conclusions about the preferences of the entire voting population, what we're using is an inference. We are inferring something about the population based on what our sample said. And if it's a good representative sample, we can actually do that. The relationship is that we want to select well. We want to try and select a sample that represents an entire population, whatever it is. Although the sample is smaller, the relationship of the statistics inside that sample to the whole will be reflective of what we know about the entire population if we've done our job correctly. Now this can go wrong. An example of this was the 1948 presidential election. Here were the actual results in which Truman Barkley, the Democratic presidential contender in 1948, actually won the presidency with a percentage of 49.7% of the vote. However, there was a study done by the Chicago Times, and they had predicted that Dewey, the Republican, will defeat Truman. And they put out this paper the night before the election. And of course, there's this very famous picture right here of President Truman, then President-elect Truman, holding up the paper that said Dewey defeats Truman. We have to be careful in the way that we do it. But if we look at just this descriptive statistics right here about our presidential winners right here, we say this is a summary of the votes cast. No inferences are made, and by the way, in this descriptive study, we consider this to be almost a population, even though typically not all voters vote, right? If we counted up all of these votes right here from 1948, maybe not every American of voting age actually voted, but this is the population of all people who did vote in the United States. So let's see if we can figure it out ourselves. One of the questions from 1.1 says, the drug use. Use of U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services collects and publishes data on non-medical drug use by types of drug and age group in a national survey of use and health, of drug use and health. The following table provides data from the years 2003 and 2008. The percentages shown are estimates for the entire nation based on information obtained from the sample. If you see NA, it means it was not available. So this is our percentages of 18 to 25-year-olds, of people 18 to 25 who have ever used a drug or are current users, and the comparison between the years 2003 and 2008. We can see that, for example, any illicit drug use went down from 60.5 to 56.6% in 2008. However, there were differences in the numbers from those 2 years, and we can see alcohol, for example, was measured as 87.1% in 2003, 85.6%, and so on. So the question is, should we describe this as inferential or descriptive statistics? Pause for a moment and come up with your answer. Okay, have you got an answer? Great. This is definitely descriptive. It's a summary of drug use from 18 to 25-year-olds in America in 2003 and 2008. No inferences were made, simply a description of the situation based on the data. Cool, let's try another one. Let's state whether the following was what we call an observational study or an experimental study. The difference is that in an observational study, we simply observe the results without any attempt to try and determine how some treatment would affect the outcome. In an experimental design, think about something like a drug test. In an experimental design, we apply a treatment and we attempt to see whether or not that treatment was effective as opposed to ineffective. So in this problem, we're told that the Salk vaccine by Jonas Salk. Right? In the 1940s and early 50s, the public was greatly concerned about a disease called polio. In an attempt to prevent this disease, Jonas Salk of the University of Pittsburgh developed a polio vaccine. In a test of the vaccine's efficacy involving nearly 2 million grade school children, half of the children received the Salk vaccine and the other half received a placebo being a non-drug that looks exactly like the other drug. Perhaps it contains sugar or some other substance, but not the drug itself. The injectee, the subject, is never told which one they're getting. In this case, the injection of salt dissolved in water. Neither the children nor the doctor performing the diagnosis knew which children belonged to which group. We call this a double-blind study. But an evaluation center did. The center found that the incidence of polio was far less among the children who were inoculated with the Salk vaccine. From that information, the researchers concluded that the vaccine would be effective in preventing polio for all U.S. school children. Consequently, it was made available for general use. And by the way, consequently, in the United States today, polio is almost completely unknown. So would you consider this observational or experimental? Take a moment here and think about your answer. Okay, did you think about it? The classification is that this is an inferential observational study. I should have answered that observational. This word means inferential observational. It's based on data gathered about polio gathered in children where half received the vaccine and the placebo. The experimental design, this part of the experiment was experimental in that because half the children did receive and half the children did not, in a double-blind study, both the patient and the doctor did not know what was happening, it was found that the incidence of polio was far less among the children who received the vaccine. By experiment, then, we've come to a conclusion, an inference about the effectiveness of the drug. So this is one other type of design you'll want to know. Okay, Chapter 1, Section 2, coming up next.